Hi class, in this video gonna go over the chapters on business cycle. Now guys, probably heard this all the time in the news, on newspaper. So economy is going up, economy is going down. This short-term fluctuation of this up and down in the economic activities, this is called business cycle. So just like our four seasons, the spring, summer, fall, winter, the economy also follow this cycle here. So it goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And then if you look at the U.S. economy for the last maybe 150 years, on average, economy is growing about 2% per year, but it's not a consistent 2% per year. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, and sometimes even negative. So if you look at this chart over here, see this big drop here in the middle? That big drop there, that is our depression in the economy, and that's the recovery during World War II, right? So even though on average economy is growing about 2% per year, but this growth line is it's not a very smooth line, right? There are a lot of fluctuation in it, and this fluctuation is called a business cycle. You know what's a potential output? You guys are gonna hear this a lot in the future chapters. So potential output is the best. Imagine as this is the best scenario for the economy. So when all the resources are fully employed, everybody have a job, all the resources are used very efficiently, that is called a potential output. So long-term economic growth reflect this economy's potential output. So for US economy, our potential output grows about 2% per year. And another thing to look at this economic downturn or economic recession is that unemployment is higher, right? So this unemployment means that we have resources, which is labor, that's currently not used right now. So every time there's a recession, we're going to see a lot of unemployment in the economy. So economy behaving below potential output, we are not using all the resources, then we're seeing a higher unemployment rate. So if you want to see the correlation between unemployment rate and our business cycle, notice that every time that so blue line is our unemployment rate, so every time it's going up, it's always in this little gray area. So that gray area representing each recession in the US economy, right? So recession and unemployment rate tend to go hand in hand, right? So every time we have recession, we're going to see high unemployment rate. All right, so also know what's the output gap, and this is a very important vocabulary as well. You guys are going to use this formula a lot in the future chapters. So your output gap is how much is this potential gap we have compared to our potential output. So our current output compared to our potential output, how much is that gap? That's called an output gap. So this number can be positive, this number can be negative. So every time you have a recession, you're going to see a negative output gap. So your actual output is less than potential. And every time you see a positive number, that means the economy is growing. So economic expansion. Now this times 100 here, what it does, it just turns our decimal into a percentage. So it's not really times 100. This should be more like a times instead of 100 should be more like a times 100%, right? So your output gap should be a percentage. So if you look at our output gap, so again, negative output gap. So right here, this negative output gap, that's our recession. So that's the 2008-2010 recession. And then every time it's positive. So right here, that's positive. Over here is also positive. That's representing economic growth, right? So if you look at on the zoom in, then this gap here, that's a positive. That's when the economy is really good. That's when the remember, if you guys know what is the dot-com bubble, that's the dot-com bubble, right? So and over here, that's the boom for the housing bubble, and then crash by 2008, and then we have a huge economic negative output gap, right? So every time it's positive, that's good, economy is growing. Every time it's negative, that means it's bad, economy is contracting. All right, so there are four phases in the business cycle. They're called peak. That's the highest point of an economic activity. Trough is the lowest point. Recession is when it's decreasing. Expansion is when it's increasing. So if you look at the growth, so peak is right here. That's the highest point. Going down, that's a recession. At the bottom there, that's a trough, and then going upward, that's expansion, right? So the reason why we call this because it is a full cycle, right? So expansion, peak at the top, recession going down, and then trough at the bottom. So right here, that's a full cycle, and then start again, right? And then we have expansion going upward, peak going down, and then trough, right? So another cycle, and that's why it's called a business cycle. So the economy always repeats itself. So expansion, peak, recession, trough. But one thing about this recession and expansion, even though this cycle always follow each other, but how long the cycle is unpredictable. Look at the U.S. economy in the last maybe 60 years. So in 1961, that was a very long expansion, 8.8 years, and then it followed with a very brief recession, and then very short expansion, only 3 years. Okay, so sometimes expansion is long, sometimes it's short. So the 2009 expansion, it lasted until 2020, and then we had a COVID, right? So that was a very long expansion as well, so almost 11 year expansion. All right, so look at some common characteristics of a business cycle. So recession are usually very short and sharp. So the economy goes way down. But expansion tend to be very slow and long and gradual, so slowly increasing for a long time. Look at our economic activities. So this is our GDP, our output gap. This is a huge drop. This recession. The recession is always very, very short, very sharp. But for the expansion, it's a very long, gradually slowing, increasing. Right. So that's the common thing with our business cycle. So recession is always short, expansion tend to be longer. Now, for business cycles, they tend to be persistent. Again, they always follow each other. And also for the economic performance, they tend not to change by that much. So your current performance is very similar to your last performance. If you graph our output gap for each year compared to the output gap and the year before, you do see this trend of 45-degree line. That means in general, these two numbers here, they tend to equal to each other, right? So how much your output gap is for this year tend to equal to how much your output gap is for last year. That's why I call it the business cycle is very persistent, not very much big changes in the economy. I think for the impact of business cycle is that it impacts many parts of the economy, not just our economic activities, but also looking at our price levels, our unemployment rate, the impact in different industries, because every single aspect of the economy is all being impacted by the business cycle, and then it's also country nationwide as well. More than often than whenever you have a recession, it's not just a one state recession. They tend to be a very regional recession or even very national recession. So if you compare our unemployment rate for the last 20 years among different states, they tend to go very hand in hand. I see the increasing here, right? Increasing. So they all increase at about the same time, and that was our national recession back in 2008, 2010. But you do see other states tend to be a little more flat. So Alaska tend to be a little more flat. North Dakota is very, very low unemployment rate and also very, very flat. That means if anybody who want a job, if you go to North Dakota, you will find a job. So pretty much everybody in North Dakota is all working. There's not many people who are unemployed in North Dakota. That's because if you couldn't find a job in North Dakota, you don't stay in North Dakota. You go back home to where you come from, right? So people are not unemployed. For one, because there are jobs over there, especially in the constructions and also oil and gas industry. But also it means that people who are unemployed, they don't stay in Alaska. I mean, they don't stay in North Dakota. That's why North Dakota is very, very low unemployment rate. Okay, but for everybody else, for all the other states in the country, you see the trend is very, very similar. So increasing Oh, you know what? Oh, that's bad. That's Louisiana. By the way, guys, for Louisiana, this sharp increase, different color. Let me use green. So this sharp increase, that was the Hurricane Katrina, right? So that was really bad for the state too. Okay, so the unemployment rate, business cycle, they do tend to follow a nationwide trend. Okay. All right, and then if you compare some of the measurements together, they are going hand in hand. So compare our real GDP, employment, retail sales, industrial production. You see how they all follow the same trend, right? So for most of the measurement in the economy, they all tend to follow the same trend. More measurements, so look at different industries. So business, construction, finance, information, leisure, trade, other services, again, they tend to follow the same trend as well. But you do see some industries tend to be more drastic changes. So look at construction, right? So for construction, um, green color. So there's construction here. See the increasing is the highest increasing before 2008, and then in what 2010, 2009, that's the biggest decreasing, right? So huge increase, huge decrease. So some of the jobs tend to be more cyclical, so follows along the business cycle very closely. Some of the jobs tend to be more drastic changes. So construction and then retail sales tend to be the big changes in the economy. But other things, think about maybe hospitals, medical services, then those tend to be more stable. Now, for all these indicators, there's difference between a leading indicator and a lagging indicator. So leading indicator, that means this thing will change first. So think about more than often unemployment rate tend to be a leading indicator. And a lagging indicator tend to be something that's falling behind everybody else. So when all the other variable has changed, and this might be the last one to change. So one example for that, in the past 30, 40 years, inflation tend to be a lagging indicator in U.S. economy. Okay, so unemployment rate tend to be leading and lagging tend to be inflation. All right, so also known as a Cruz rule of thumb. So this is a very simple rule. It says for every 1% decrease in our GDP, we're going to see a half-point change in our unemployment rate, right? So one GDP, 1% in GDP would be equivalent or leading to half percent change in unemployment rate. Okay, so graph that on the diagram is also very similar. So if you plot all the economic activities in the last 40 years in U.S. economy, that you're gonna see this very similar trend. Every time there's an output gap, you're gonna see a smaller change in our unemployment rate, right? So unemployment rate tend to change slower than our real GDP. All right, so there are different type of economic data. So there are a total dozen. But most of the data are all seasonally adjusted. And this is a very common thing if you guys looking at a website called bls.gov. Now, we mentioned this in the previous chapter before. So that stands for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So that's the website keep track of all the unemployment rate, employment rate, pay, price level, and then for all the price level, they are all seasonally adjusted. And that's because for many of the economic variables, they tend to depend on the season. Right? So it doesn't matter how good, how bad the economy is, they will change, depends on different kind of season. So think about all the seasonal jobs we have in America. So like a lifeguard. So let's suppose today a lifeguard lost his job. Now, is that because the economy is bad? Or is it because it's winter now, we don't need lifeguard anymore, right? So for some of the measurement in the economy, we do want them to be seasonally adjusted. So when we do see a change in it, the impact of the different season is being isolated, so wouldn't be impacting our variables, and that's called seasonally adjusted. And also, most variables we're comparing in the economy tend to be annualized. Now, there are different measurements for different variables, right? So remember, we talk about GDP. GDP is measured every 3 months. And the unemployment rate, we have our weekly unemployment rate, we have our 2-week unemployment rate, we have our monthly unemployment rate. So there's a company called ADP. ADP is a private company. They're called a payroll processor. So they're the biggest payroll processor in the country. Now, for you guys, when you get a paycheck from your company, look at the little number, little like a logo on the paycheck. More than often, the paycheck is actually being processed by a company called ADP. So this company has a lot of information on the number of paycheck that's being processed in the economy every 2 weeks. So this company keep publishing data on the level of unemployment rate or the private sector unemployment or employment that's been measured by this company. So those numbers, but we want to compare them together. Then we're going to convert all those numbers into an annual number, and that's called annualizing rate. And also for this comparison, keep in mind that we're comparing our real variable, not nominal variable, right? So imagine we compare our GDP between 2021 versus 2022. There might be some difference involved, but big part of it because there's some inflation involved in 2021, right? So we want to see an inflation adjusted real GDP compared to the next year to see if our economy is growing or not. So there are these 10 economic indicators. So let's quickly go through each one. So the number one indicator to see how good it is our real GDP. So that's the inflation adjusted GDP. And that's the four component with our consumption, investment, government spending, and net export. So by comparing all these four sections here, we can see how good or how bad the economy is. Next is our GDI, gross domestic income. So in most situations, our gross domestic income will actually equal to our GDP, right? So it's a very good measurement to see how much our economy is worth as well, because how much money you're spending is equal to how much your income is. And next, we're looking at our non-farm payroll. Now, again, the reason why non-farm, because many of the farm works are seasonal, right? So to have a seasonal adjusted employment level, looking at our non-farm payroll, and the ADP is a leading provider for this non-farm payroll. So how many people are hired or on the payroll by the private sectors? Our unemployment rate. So unemployment rate is the unemployment for the entire country. So this, remember the formula for this is our unemployed divided by labor force. That's our unemployment rate. Also look at our initial unemployment claim. So we can look at how many people are actually applying for unemployment benefit. That's another sign to see how bad the economy is. We have our business confidence. So this is a survey we send it to all the business owners, ask them how confident do they feel about the future, and then what is their plan for their business in the upcoming year, right? Do they plan to expand or do they plan to lay some people off? And we also have our consumer confidence. We mentioned this in the previous chapters. This is how confident our customer feel about the future of the economy. So the higher the consumer confidence, the more likely the consumer will make the big purchase for more consumptions. The inflation rate. So this is what is happening in 2021, 2022. So high inflation economy. We have our employment cost index. So this tells you how much it will cost, how high the wage and benefit has been increasing. Now, whenever you have a higher real wage in the economy, they tend to show a very healthy economy. So whenever the real wage is increasing, so adjusted for inflation, then when the wage is increasing, economists are very, very happy because that actually shows a very good sign of the economy that with more production, we need more workers, and therefore wage is increasing. The last factor here, the last variable is our stock market. So stock market will tell you how good the future expectation for business are, right? So they are telling you some information about the current business environment, but mostly about the future expectation, because most of the investment on the stock market are all based on speculation about the future. Okay. So, and then if you look at the measurement, the 10 measurement here, they are somewhat similar. So whenever you see a big recession, so there's recession here, recession here, recession here, recession. So they tend to tell the similar story, right? So whenever our country's economic advisor get together to determine whenever the economy is in recession, we're looking at the entire 10 measurement here. So it's a combined measurement to see how good the economy is, and then we determine if the economy is actually in recession. Lastly, so 5 tips for tracking the economy. We're looking at many indicators. We look at the big indicators and also looking at data. A lot of them are very fresh data. And then the economists try to look for the signal in all the data. And lastly, then whenever your expectation change, they'll also change your future outlook. Okay. All right, guys. So that's it for this chapter. Have any question? Let me know. Okay. Bye bye.